Welcome to the Big Book Study Podcast for anyone and everyone interested in a spiritual way of life. We are a study we are a step study which meets each week on Sundays at 2 p.m. Eastern and Wednesdays at 9 p.m. Eastern. You can find our website at primarypurposebigbookstudy.com. This podcast series is a brief study of each tradition as presented in the original 12 steps and 12 traditions. AA has made the difference between misery and sobriety, and often the difference between life and death. Therefore, the AA Society of Men and Women in the beginning realized the urgent need for continuous effectiveness and permanent unity, and saw that we must work together and hang together, else most of us will finally die alone. The 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous are what beginning AAs believed the best answers that their experience had given them to those ever urgent questions. How can AA best function? And how can AA best stay whole and so survive? I am Lisa from Michigan. We also have Kathleen from Colorado, Kashi from Florida, Nicole from Texas, and Jacqueline from Washington. Today's study is on Tradition 4. I will read the short form of the tradition in a couple of paragraphs, and then we will have comments. Tradition 4. Each group should be autonomous except in matters affecting other groups or AA as a whole. Autonomy is a $10 word, but in relation to us, it means very simply that every AA group can manage its affairs exactly as it pleases, except when AA as a whole is threatened. Comes now the same question raised in Tradition 1. Isn't such liberty foolishly dangerous? Over the years, every conceivable deviation from our 12 steps and traditions has been tried. That was sure to be, since we are so largely a band of ego-driven individualists. Children of chaos, we have defiantly played with every brand of fire, only to emerge unharmed, and we think wiser. These very deviations created a vast process of trial and error, which, under the grace of God, has brought us to where we stand today. I'll offer a couple of comments. So we see here in this tradition that just as the individual is autonomous, meaning they're independent except in matters affecting the group, which is our tradition 1, so the group can also make its own decision. Tradition 2 instructs us that we do this through a group conscience. So we can do this provided it doesn't impact AA as a whole. And sometimes the only way that we can tell this is through trial and error. And so we make our best group conscious decision and then see what happens. And we can always make another group conscious decision if we find that there's fallout or negative consequences from that. The group is always able to make another group conscious decision, either improving upon it or changing it. And so, as it says, we're always unharmed, we emerge unharmed. So there may be some consequences. However, we keep in mind that God is the ultimate authority, as the traditions tell us. So just as we can make errors in our own personal life, this can also happen in the groups. But by the grace of God, we can always come back to center. God's will can always be done, or higher powers' will can always be done. Even if we try something and it doesn't work out, we can always try something else. And with that, I will pass.
Thanks, Lisa, and thank you for your service. This paragraph made me think about in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, in the chapter working with others. It says your job now is to be at a place where you may be of maximum helpfulness to others. So never hesitate to go anywhere if you can be helpful. And then it goes on to say, keep on the firing line with these motives and God will keep you unharmed. So, in the description here, they are offering this absolute certainty in the idea of liberty and autonomy with a group of people that they also describe as chaotic and destructive. So, like, how did they arrive at such a place of certainty and this perfect freedom to make mistakes. And so, there's emanating from that this trust that there's higher power in all of it, that any of our mistakes can be used for good. At any moment, we can make a decision to turn our mistakes towards being of useful service to others. And there's just a trust in this process of trial and error, and that trial and error is a part of how we grow in understanding and effectiveness towards our own individual higher power and our group collective consciousness. And I'll pass.
Thank you, Nicole. This is Kathleen. I'm going to keep reading. I'll go on to the next couple paragraphs here. When AA's traditions were first published in 1946, we had become sure that an AA group could stand almost any amount of battering. We saw that the group, exactly like the individual, must eventually conform to whatever tested principles would guarantee survival. We had discovered that there was perfect safety in the process of trial and error. So confident of this, had we become that the original statement of AA tradition carried this significant sentence: any 2 or 3 alcoholics gathered together for sobriety may call themselves an AA group, provided that as a group they have no other affiliation. This meant, of course, that we had been given the courage to declare each AA group an individual entity strictly reliant on its own conscience as a guide to action. In charting this enormous expanse of freedom, we found it necessary to post only 2 storm signals. A group ought not do anything which would greatly injure AA as a whole, nor ought it affiliate itself with anything or anybody else. These would be real danger should we commence to call some groups wet, others dry, still others Republican or Communist, and yet others Catholic or Protestant. The AA group would have to stick to its course or be hopelessly lost. Sobriety had to be its sole objective. In all other respects, there was perfect freedom of will and action. Every group had the right to be wrong. And I'll make a comment. I love this parallel that they make in the first paragraph of this reading that I just did. That the group, just like the individual, because we are ego-driven individualists, we were used to trying things, trying to run the show, and what we find in AA is that there's this fine balance of there are certain principles that are absolutely required as individuals and as groups. There's not a lot of them. They're great principles, but they are absolutely required for our sobriety, and they're required for the group to remain, to exist. And the principles still allow so much freedom. And AA, or the 12 steps for us, is like this. An example would be, as an individual, whatever we define higher power to be is up to us. But there is a power, right? There's a power greater than our will, greater than us trying to run the show, greater than our fear. But we get to choose what that looks like or what we call it. And so there's a lot of freedom, but there are some principles that are absolutely required for us to survive. And the 2 that they discovered were so critical is this tradition, and actually another one, but basically that we can't injure AA as a whole, and we can't be affiliated with anything outside of AA. And this is what allowed the groups to survive. And we have to, because we are ego-driven individualists, it's really good for us to be a part of something that we need to protect. We need to make sure that we're not so far out there that we're going to harm other groups. And we get to be wrong. So it talks about that in the second paragraph, meaning we get to try things and they are wrong. We get to make mistakes. This is something that is a part of, it's all through the big book. It talks over and over and over and over and over again about how we're still going to make mistakes. Life is still going to be challenging. We're still going to have to return to our recovery. We are not perfect. We are going to try new things. It's in the trying new things that we learn about what's going to work. We learn about what's going to keep us close to our higher power and what's not. But these principles are so critical. And for the individual, it's living in 10, 11, and 12. It's completing the first 9 steps and living in 10, 11, and 12. And that's helping people and taking an inventory of ourselves on a regular basis and staying close to a higher power. And for these groups, it's not entering AA and it's not being affiliated with other groups. And all of the traditions are basically principles that keep these groups alive. And with that, I'll pass. Any other comments?
Hi, it's Lisa. Thank you, Kathleen. I had a couple of comments. So we see in this instruction that each group is an individual entity relying upon the group conscience as a guide for action. That's from tradition 2, that we know that our ultimate authority is a loving God. So no one person is in charge to decide what's right or wrong. But as was mentioned, we have just these 2 guidelines for the groups that need to be adhered to keep the groups healthy. One, we shouldn't do anything that would injure AA as a whole. So what would be like some examples of that? That might be bringing in outside issues such as philosophies or religions or psychology. And any time that someone would attempt to like change or add to the steps or the traditions, I've witnessed in meetings people rereading the steps, slightly changing the wording, and that really isn't part of what we do. That would injure AA as a whole. We're changing some of the foundation of our program. And the second thing is that we should not, as a group, affiliate with anything else. And these examples would be something like somebody advertising a rehab facility during the meeting, or this retreat that's going on that is, sponsored by some outside entity, like a religious retreat or any kind of outside group. Even naming a group after the church where it meets can imply affiliation. So it can sound exclusive. But this is, the St. Mary's AA group. Well, that can imply that only members of, St. Mary's go to that group. So these really give us like these nice boundaries with these 2 principles that we can, as long as we're not injuring AA as a whole, as long as we're not affiliating, we're free to do other things. We're free to try different formats, et cetera, et cetera. But those are, really important guidelines, as was mentioned. And so we adhere to those. And with that, I'll pass.
Thanks, Lisa. This is Jacqueline. The sentence in that first paragraph that was just read, we saw that the group, exactly like the individual, must eventually conform to whatever tested principles would guarantee survival. That reminds me, on an individual basis that, if we have more bad ideas that we need to go execute within or in our own lives, that we should do that, and that the education that we're going to receive, the wisdom that will eventually accrue, is going to be turning us back into these core principles. The potency of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous is that, it's co-authored by a number of humans who have put these things at a test, both individually and within their own groups of recovery. And so we get to see for ourselves that turning back to these core principles. In regards to some of the identifiers that are suggested, as far as a group not ought do anything which would greatly injure AA as a whole, nor ought it affiliate itself with anything or anybody else. That reminds me to last month's Tradition 3, where the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. Now, when they're talking about this, obviously there can be individuals that identify with, they share that desire to stop drinking. But when you start adding more qualifiers, it can just add some confusion to others who are seeking their own recovery. And so really removing, as was previously mentioned, external philosophies or religions or other qualifiers like that keeps the core message and the practice of recovery really clear for those that are after it. With that, I'll pass. Thank you.
This is Kashi in Florida. We'll keep going. When AA was still young, lots of eager groups were forming in a town we'll call Middletown. A real crackerjack had started up. The town's people were as hot as firecrackers about it. Stargazing, the elders dreamed of innovations. They figured the town needed a great big alcoholic center, a kind of pilot plant AA groups could duplicate everywhere. Beginning on the ground floor, there would be a club. In the second story, they would sober up drunks and hand them currency for their back debts. The third deck would house an educational project, quite non-controversial, of course. In imagination, the gleaming center was to go up several stories more, but 3 would do for a start. This would all take a lot of money, other people's money. Believe it or not, wealthy townsfolk bought the idea. They were, though, a few conservative dissenters among the alcoholics. They wrote the foundation, AA's headquarters in New York, wanting to know about this sort of streamlining. They understood that the elders, just to nail things down good, were about to apply to the foundation for a charter. These few were disturbed and skeptical. Pass.
This is Jacqueline from Washington. When I reading about this building, this new attempt, I can't help but think of the layers of ego that are involved with each story of this idea. And each of us have that ego that can crawl back in any moment. That's why we practice 10th steps, and that's why we stay close to higher power and try to do higher power's work well. But looking at this building, so the ground floor would be a club. How I read that is, why do people attend clubs? It's for a social, oftentimes some sort of social fix. So that's one version of get that I'm seeing in this. The second story, they would sober up drunks and hand them currency for their back debts. The sobering up, great, but so long as people are actually wanting to sober up without the additional incentive of then receiving money to take care of their debts. So again, just this ego of the second story has a layer of get in it as well. And then the third deck, an educational project, and I think kind of tongue in cheek, it adds after the hyphen there, quite non-controversial, of course. So it would be really hard to figure out what an educational project would be outside of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which isn't so much an educational project, more so these guiding principles that have been led by a greater conscience, that so long that people are practicing that they're one small part of a greater picture, however they identify with their own higher power. So interesting that, you know, there were enough people that could get on board with this idea. And, you know, in hindsight, of course, we can identify as the story unfolds that it's a bad idea. But again, what we read before is that every group has the right to be wrong. And there's a lot of freedom in that experimentation, both as the individual, that autonomy is intact. And we'll see how, you know, this particular group is guided back towards the core principles of this spiritual lifestyle. Thanks. With that, I'll pass.
Thanks, Jacqueline. Kathleen here. I was noticing at the very end, the elders were these are the elders, these are the folks that have been in the AA group for a while. So they have some recovery. They have time with recovery, and they're feeling disturbed and skeptical. And those are very clear indicators that we're probably on the wrong track. We're off to the wrong place. We learn this as we evolve in our recovery individually, that when we feel disturbed, something's up, right? We're probably doing something that is outside of our ideal, our higher power's ideal for us. And when we're skeptical, confused, these are really important indicators, and we don't know them in our disease, and we don't know them early in our recovery because we're so used to being disturbed. We're so used to being confused and skeptical about things that we don't know what it feels like to have peace and contentment around decisions and around making choices about how to develop our lives. This comes with time. We have to have time with our higher power to know what it feels like when we're making a decision and we feel contentment about it. We feel peace about it. Disturbed is the first thing in our 10th step. When we feel disturbed, that's when it's time to do an inventory. And so if we, take it from the individual to the group, here's a group. We've got a few individuals that are disturbed about this. And it can be hard to read in the beginning because we don't know, is our ego, is our disease taking over here where we want to be in control? We don't want something to grow. We want it to go our way. Or is there really something here that's out of alignment with maybe our ultimate authority? God consciousness, is there something out of alignment here? And the good news is we get to go ahead and try. We get to go ahead and make a mistake, because if we're disturbed and we go forward with a decision, we will find misery at the end of that. It will become very clear. And then we get to go back to the connection with our higher power, go back to helping others, which is critical. And all that, and we get to ask to have it removed, and all of it gets cleaned up and cleared up by returning to our recovery and returning to our higher power, and our higher power takes care of it. In the big book, it talks about God is either everything or nothing. So if God, I'd like to think that God is everything rather than nothing. I'm kind of doomed if God is nothing. But if God is everything, then even when we go down the wrong path, right? Even when we bypass our disturbances, our skepticism, and don't do a tenth and don't look closely at where we're headed, that's okay, because higher, we got a new day, we got a new 24 hours, and higher power is going to help remove that and teach us through it, and possibly teach some other people that are involved. And with that, I'll pass.
Thanks, Kathleen. Hi, it's Lisa. Wanted to mention, it talks about a couple of things that are good things to keep in mind in our groups. This idea that the educational project would be non-controversial. And the question here is, what is being taught? How can we use our own judgment to declare something as controversial or non-controversial? As addicts, we're always full of a lot of good ideas, and this could be kind of a warning sign. If we can't really define it by the program itself, then we have to question it. And the second part is this affiliation with these wealthy backers who were providing the funds here. Anytime we're involving people and their money, there's going to be this human nature that these donors are going to want this project to align with their values. And maybe that won't be a problem, but there are chances that they're going to have other ideas and other affiliations that are beyond AA itself. And so, these are two areas of concern. And as was mentioned, there will be disturbances within us, at least within some of us, and there will be this trial and error and repercussions. And then we will need to sort of regroup and come back to center and, realize that we tried something, didn't go over real well. So we need to regroup. And what's the beauty of this program is that it provides us these steps and these traditions to guide us along this path. So we, it's like doing a step 10 that instead of continuing to pursue the obsessive thought that we might be having and try to manipulate external circumstances to fit into this thought, it's the same with the group conscience. There is now new ideas being entered in. And so we don't pursue this idea that we had to the death. We don't keep trying and trying and trying and forcing it like we did before we were recovered. That was our way. We had an obsessive thought. We wanted to get something, and we were just going to pursue that to the gates of hell. It didn't matter. We had to get it. And now we're recovered. We know that we don't have to get what we want. And instead, we're looking to be aligned with this higher power who is ultimately our solution. So if we're looking for that, we're going to find that there will be times that we will need to let go of these good ideas, these pet projects, things like that. And instead, we need to align with the group conscience, which the group conscience only has the ultimate authority of a loving higher power. With that, I'll pass.
This is Jacqueline. Thanks, Lisa. I had one more brief comment. In the beginning of this last reading, it talks about how lots of eager groups were forming in a town that they're calling Middleton, and they refer to it as a real crackerjack had started up. The townspeople were as hot as firecrackers about it. And, in the big book, it talks about how there are a lot of different kind of feelings, lows and highs, that we need to just be cognizant of as we're navigating recovery. And excitement is one of them. And there's a neutrality, when, both as an individual and as a group. There's a real calm neutrality that sets in. And so that's, I guess, just an earmark of, when a group or an individual is feeling as hot as a firecracker about something in regards to recovery or elsewhere, it's just something to stay cognizant of. Thanks. With that, I'll pass.
This is Nicole. I'll go ahead and continue reading. Of course, there was a promoter in the deal, a super promoter. By his eloquence, he allayed all fears, despite advice from the foundation that it could issue no charter, and that ventures which mixed an AA group with medication and education had come to sticky ends elsewhere. To make things safer, the promoter organized 3 corporations and became president of them all. Freshly painted, the new center shone. The warmth of it all spread through the town. Soon things began to hum. To ensure foolproof, continuous operation, 61 rules and regulations were adopted. But alas, this bright scene was not long in darkening. Confusion replaced serenity. It was found that some drunks yearned for education, but doubted if they were alcoholics. The personality defects of others could be cured maybe with a loan. Some were club-minded, but it was just a question of taking care of the lonely heart. Sometimes the swarming applicants would go for all 3 floors. Some would start at the top and come through the bottom, becoming club members. Others started in the club, pitched a binge, were hospitalized, then graduated to education on the 3rd floor. It was a beehive of activity, all right, but unlike a beehive, it was confusion compounded. An AA group as such simply couldn't handle this sort of project. All too late, that was discovered. Then came the inevitable explosion, something like the day the boiler burst in Wombley's clapboard factory. A chill choke damp of fear and frustration fell over the group. So I'll offer a comment about this, that sometimes our mistakes are small, and sometimes our mistakes involve girders and elevators in 3-story buildings before life finally kicks us in the head. And if we have this spiritual malady, we can't tell the true from the false. And they say it in the big book of AA, and it's true that we are baffled a lot. We have a good idea, and then we take an action, and then we look around and we go, why is everybody so upset? Why is there all this chaos? Like, why is there all this confusion? How did I get here? And we can't figure it out. We can't do the mess math. And once we work the steps, we're given this opportunity and these tools to pick up the thread and follow it back. We're not responsible for other people and their reactions, but where did we ourselves set the ball rolling in all of it? Our intentions might be good, but intentions are different from motives. And we can't really know the mind or the motives of the person who is sharing this experience, but we can apply some of the manifestations of our disease, and we can say, maybe if we did this, maybe we were feeling badly about ourselves, or maybe they were feeling badly about themselves, and they're trying to get something on the outside to make them feel better on the inside. Maybe they are, looking at all of these alcoholics needing help, and they're wanting to fix it. And it might look like that they're helping, but what we're really doing is fixing, because we're in some kind of discomfort about other people's discomfort. And maybe fixing is a way that we try to get something from the outside, to get belonging or to get safety, or we're trying to get approval, or we think we have a good idea and it's a way to distinguish ourselves, or maybe we're the person sitting in the back watching this person run into the walls and we're judging them, or going along with the idea in order to get something for ourselves. And so we take this first step forward with selfish and self-centered motives, and then things start to snowball and we're like, how did I get here? The good news is that we can't quit trying to get something on the outside to make us feel better on the inside, but at any point we can make the decision to turn. And eventually our suffering will reach a point that we surrender and we go, okay, I don't know how to get myself out of this. And we can turn instead to how can this experience and our mistakes be helpful to someone else? And I'll pass there.
Sorry, Kathleen, you're still muted.
Thank you. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, confusion replaced serenity. So here it is. We're in it, but we're going to keep going, right? This is what we do as addicts because we have to have enough misery to get us to turn. But we're confused. There's not serenity. There's also these, they call them drunks. They yearned for education, but doubted if they were alcoholics. So when we start bringing in a human solution, which is kind of what's involved in these 3 stories and the way that people move through them or whatever, really the only education that we need if we are a real deal alcoholic or ick of some kind, the only education we need is the big book with the instructions. And we need to learn about alcoholism from the big book. Like that's the education that we need. And we don't need any other kind of self-improvement, self-help. What we need is to learn the instructions because that's the only solution for those of us that no other solution works. And the great illusion that we deal with as alcoholics and icks is that we will one day be able to be like everybody else. We'll be able to drink like other people. We'll be able to be in relationships like other people. We'll be able to have sex like other people. We'll be able to eat whatever we want like other people. Whatever our malady is, that is the great illusion. And so we are very susceptible to that illusion. It's part of our thinking problem and it will come back. And so we begin to think, oh, maybe I'm not really an alcoholic. And the other thing that's happening here is there's something about, I'm not sure I fully understood. Well, the club minded, it was really about taking care of a lonely heart. And that was mentioned earlier about the social, it wasn't said this way, but basically the social hit. It's like trying to get something on the outside to make us feel better on the inside. So, we get to learn about a lonely heart. And what we learn is that we're never alone. We can always create connection. We have a connection with a higher power, which we can always create 24/7 if we want. We have connection with our fellows. We have connection with helping others who suffer the way that we do. We can create connection in the world through the inspiration of our higher power in a helpful and useful way. And then they get to the point where they realize they simply cannot handle this project. They can't handle it. And fear and frustration falls over the group. Thanks, I'll pass.
Thanks, Kathleen. Hi, it's Lisa. Yeah, so in this paragraph, we hear, to make things safe for the promoter organized 3 corporations, became president of them all. So we're hearing right here that fear is becoming a motivating factor. And just like in our personal lives, if we're motivated by fear, we're not going to have a positive result. We're going to never get enough of security. So we're going to keep trying to manage this thing, just as we have tried to manage our addictions. Here we have 61 rules to try and manage this project. And, if we need 61 rules, that's a sign that there's a problem. We who have gone through the steps, we've learned that we just have two jobs, and one is to stay close to God, and the other is to perform His work well. And it's a simple program. It might not be easy, but it's simple. This just gives us an example of how we might try to manage our lives. Like we might make rules for ourselves as individuals. Like I'm having problem. I'm as a codependent, I'm addicted to this person. So, and I keep staying up past my bedtime, talking to this person. So my new rule is going to be, I'm not going to answer the phone after 10 p.m. But then, the person is trying to get a hold of us. So, we can't get enough of feeling secure in the relationship. So we're going to decide we're going to text them. And then we're staying up all night. So then we're going to need another rule that we're not going to text after 10 p.m. And this is how these rules come up that never make our life manageable. This is actually our disease. This was our old way of coping with things. We can establish boundaries with the help of our higher power, but it's only through staying close to our higher power that we're going to be able to stay with our new ideals. We're going to develop these new ideals. And when we're straying from them, we're going to do a step 10, and we're going to eventually turn to get back to being helpful and useful to others. And that's the thing that's going to get us back on track. And so it's the same with the group. The group is starting to make all these rules and making all these guidelines that, they're just compounding upon themselves. What we see is that instead of creating a place for people to come and get help, we've created all this chaos, confusion, complexity. And through all of that, there's more focus on what are these rules? Am I aligning myself to the rules than there is on getting recovered, getting the help, and for those who are recovered, the AA book of Alcoholics Anonymous tells us that our primary purpose is to help others who suffer. So we have to, get back to that. But yeah, the good news is that we can always, realign with higher power, whether it's an individual basis or on a group basis. And higher power is going to help with us, and he can work, he, she, it, whatever you want to call your higher power can work through the masses, can create calm out of chaos. So we're always looking to come back to that center, back to that center of being higher power motivated. And when we are, we're no longer being motivated by this fear, but we're being motivated by the desire to give. And that will come through. And as I mentioned, higher power can help us to get back to center and clean up any messes that we've made. And with that, I'll pass.
Thank you, Lisa. I can go ahead and continue the reading. I'll just reread the last sentence of the last paragraph that was read because it's alluded to in the start of this new reading. A chill choke damp of fear and frustration fell over the group. When that lifted, a wonderful thing had happened. The head promoter wrote the foundation office. He said he wished he'd paid some attention to AA experience. Then he did something else that was to become an AA classic. It all went on a little card about golf score size. The cover read, Middleton Group Number 1, Rule Number 62. Once the card was unfolded, a single pungent sentence leaped to the eye. Don't take yourself too damn seriously. Thus it was that under Tradition 4, an AA group had exercised its right to be wrong. Moreover, it had performed a great service for Alcoholics Anonymous, because it had been humbly willing to apply the lessons it learned. It had picked itself up with a laugh and gone on to better things. Even the chief architect, standing in the ruins of his dream, could laugh at himself, and that is the very acme of humility. I really have enjoyed this entire Tradition 4 write-up in the 12 and 12, because there really is a lot of humility, even in the way that this tradition obviously has come about, but this particular example that they're using, there's a lot of tongue-in-cheek and a lot of humility that's being written about. So, here they are um, they're lining out 61 rules and regulations to adopt so that they can try to manage this experiment, that's funded with external finances, that's kind of emulating a corporate startup. And these 61 rules are trying to manage all the bees in a hive, if they're fluctuating floor 1, floor 3, maybe all 3 floors, what new rule do we need to incorporate to manage that particular bumblebee, in contrast to the next? And they're finally just oppressed by this fear and frustration that they can't manage it all. There aren't enough rules to manage every single variant that's going to come up. And again, like that first paragraph or second paragraph said, that we're all children of chaos. We have defiantly played with every brand of fire, and that we're a band of ego-driven individualists. So trying to outline enough rules to manage all of that, that's what this example I think is showing. And so here comes rule number 62. Don't take yourself too damn seriously. And again, that's that release point. That's where we go from confusion back to clarity. We go from excitement or depression back to neutrality, where we get to try, in this case, as a group, and despite people who had their reservations and were disturbed and skeptical, this particular group moved forward and tried something new. And that deflation of frustration brought them back to a place where they could laugh at themselves again. They could say, okay, yep, we went too far there. And yet, in doing so, they offered a lesson, not only for themselves as a group and as individuals. Says even the chief architect could, standing in the ruins of his own dream, could laugh at himself. But also, here it is being passed down the lineage of recovery, where we're able to learn, if some of us gets some quote unquote bright idea that we're going to try to build corporate buildings to cross the nation and elsewhere, that's going to be like a recovery super tank for people to go to. And this is the new thing. We can remember the visual that here's this, I think it describes how the building was still shiny in its new paint. And, the various floors, and imagining even more floors above 3 floors. We have all of that and all the management and the 61 rules and growing. And then we have a book of principles that have been through trial and error and are edited, and they're new versions that evolve. But that's where that autonomy comes in. That's where that freedom is, that we get enough leash to go out and make whatever decisions we need to make. And that's going to bring us back to those core principles that are guiding each of us in recovery. And hopefully with some laughter and some practiced humility as we come back to our own sense of a higher power. With that, I'll pass. Thanks.
Thanks, Jacqueline. This is Nicole. Yeah, this is a pretty big oopsie. This is a pretty hard thing to admit. A lot of bother went into this, and we're people who really don't like bothering people. All the time and money and energy that went into all of it. And instead of the example, this person who shared this experience, instead of, again, managing their image or hiding around their mistakes, they turned it into good account. They turned and offered it up. And there's humility, not humiliation, but humility in taking that action to share their mistake in the hopes that it might help someone else. And, this is what we do when we take responsibility for our mistakes. Our suffering lifts, our higher power begins to flow back in, our freedom comes, our humor returns. And we also become open to other people's ideas and input. And it kind of, how are we ever going to know what it feels like to be in alignment with our higher power unless we experience being out of alignment. And every time we're out of alignment, that center and what it feels like to be close and in the flow with our higher power gets clearer and clearer. And yeah, this just kind of circles us all the way back to those first paragraphs and this confidence they have in our complete freedom to make mistakes. This person used their experience, and in higher power's hands, our mistakes can be used for good. Our higher power is using all of us, good and bad. It can all be used in service. And I'll pass.
Thank you, Nicole. Kathleen here. Yeah, this has definitely been covered in the last two shares, but it's so significant that we get to see such a big, expensive, significant error taken really far. And how the magic of humility brings a sense of powerlessness, and the relief that comes from that sense of powerlessness. There's just nothing like it. It's like, oh, okay. So, we finally let go. We finally get out of the driver's seat. We believe, step 2, we believe in this power that's going to take care of us. And actually believe that in this higher power that's going to help us clean all this up. And so we have this great relief where we're no longer carrying all that fear that had accumulated in this whole thing, all that chaos that had accumulated, all the burden of having to manage everything all the time that had been created, the self-doubt, the disturbances, all the things that misery that was just stacking and stacking and stacking and becoming more and more clear is all in one fell swoop with humility and admitting, oh, I'm trying to run the show. Oh, this isn't going to work. And we just return it back to higher power, and it's done. Now, there are consequences to our mistakes, and we do need to be responsible for those consequences. But we know that higher power is going to help us take care of all that. And oftentimes, we find this in step 9, oftentimes in our humility, when we clean up our side of the street, people that we have harmed can be very generous. Not always, but many times can be very generous, and they are even inspired by our humility and our willingness to recognize that we got off on the wrong path, and we're here to clean it up. So there's and then the realization that comes with the humility and the letting go is this, then the clarity comes, what the truth is, what the way is, what the higher power way is, or in this case, what the tradition is, which has, without these traditions, these groups would not exist, and they would not have helped millions and millions of people around the world. We don't even know how many people. There are so many groups that exist, and they are sustained by these traditions. And when we don't follow them, maybe the group collapses. But more groups are coming online all the time. People are being helped. Lives are being saved. All kinds of people that now are contributing, being helpful and useful, and have these big, beautiful lives that higher power intended in the first place. So it's, in this case, it's a huge realization, and it was an expensive way to get there. And oftentimes in our recovery, speaking of money, we do this. We go off on these ego-driven ideas maybe with good intention. But we do it and it costs us a lot of money, and it takes time to recover from that. But we're not, we're not in the business of being we might be very wealthy, but we're not in the business of that. We're in the business of recovery and carrying the message and helping others recover, and we will be safe and protected. We will be taking care of all of our needs, and desires will be taken care of, and our life will be better than anything we could have imagined. And that's what happened to this group. We became this AA worldwide thing that is bigger and better than anything anybody ever could have imagined. And with that, I pass.
Thank you, Kathleen. Hi, it's Lisa. Yeah, we know when we can laugh at ourselves that we've achieved this humility. This is true, in our own personal recovery or in the groups. We don't take ourselves too seriously because our thinking will never be the solution. It's not up to us to save the world. Many of us as codependents want to do just that, even after we've worked the steps and found recovery. But, the 12th step also reminds us that we try and practice. So here is an example of trying and practicing, that didn't work, that had some large consequences, but ultimately serves as an example for groups moving forward. And, had someone tried to cover up what happened and pretend like it didn't happen, we couldn't learn from that. And so in our recovery, if we can laugh at ourselves, we've come a long way. Prior to being recovered, there was a lot of shame around our actions, and we would often sort of make things worse by trying to cover it up, by trying to pretend like it didn't happen. And those were all disease-related reactions that, thank God to recovery and these 12 steps, we don't have to respond in that way anymore. And it's all anchored that even when we get to the 12th step, we try and practice. We're going to try to help others, but it doesn't mean that every time we sponsor someone, that person is going to get recovered. They may decide that they don't want to complete the steps, etc. So again, it's not up to us to save the world, but we humble ourselves and we do the next right thing as guided by our higher power. And that's where the hope comes in, that those who want this way of life. And what does the big book tell us about that? If they were to see no joy or fun in our existence, why would anybody want this? So we recover this ability to laugh, to be joyful, to enjoy life. We work these steps because we're miserable. And so in that, if we work these steps and we don't come out with a life that's joyful and more full and expanding, where we have gratitude for each day, where we see our higher power in our fellows and we're spreading that love and joy, that's ultimately where we want to be. Not in this confined place of I've got to follow these rules and I've got to do everything exactly right. Now we're going to make mistakes. If we're living life, we're going to make mistakes. But the beauty is that we're in action. If we sit still and don't do anything, higher power can't use us. But if we're moving in a direction, even if it turns out to not be the right direction, higher power can detour us, can turn us, can help us, make that turn into what is helpful and useful. But the beauty of this program is that it gets us into action. And from there, we can, move forward and continue to grow and continue to help others. And with that, I'll go ahead and read the long form of Tradition 4. With respect to its own affairs, each AA group should be responsible to no other authority than its own conscience. But when its plans concern the welfare of neighboring groups also, those groups ought to be consulted. And no group, regional committee, or individual should ever take any action that might greatly affect AA as a whole without conferring with the trustees of the General Service Board. On such issues, our common welfare is paramount. Well, thank you for joining us today. Our next podcast will be on Tradition 5 for the month of May. You can find our meetings at primarypurposebigbookstudy.com. We meet each week on Sundays at 2 p.m. Eastern and Wednesdays at 9 p.m. Eastern. Join us on the road of happy destiny.